A portion of this video was sponsored by Bespoke Post.
This is a 1995 Fiat Panda, and it's an absolute Italian car icon. When you think of iconic Italian cars, you probably think Ferrari, Lamborghini, Maserati. But when Italians think of a car that defined an entire generation, they think of this. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, I want to tell you about Bespoke Post, which is a monthly membership club that delivers awesome boxes of top-shelf goods from under-the-radar brands to its members. It's free to join, and each month Bespoke Post introduces its members to cool new products, outdoor gear, barware, kitchen goods, clothing, all based on a preference quiz you take when you first sign up. The box lineup changes every month, and each box includes around $70 in value, although you only pay a fraction of that. And 90% of items in Bespoke Post boxes come from small businesses, many of which are based here in the United States. As an example, here are a few great items from some Bespoke Post boxes. One is Beam, which is this bright headlamp that's excellent for seeing around campsites late at night, or tying your shoes if you're jogging in the dark, or anything you might want to use a headlamp for. You can see I'm enjoying mine. You also have Chill, which is this great portable cooler, which is perfect for the beach or all sorts of other types of events. And you have my personal favorite, which is called Parked. It's a camp chair, as you can see here. It's small, but reasonably comfortable and sittable and easy to use. And amazingly, it folds up to store inside this little zippered pouch, this tiny little thing, and that makes it really easy to transport if you're hiking or backpacking or whatever. One other nice benefit of Bespoke Post is that you only pay for what you want. Before each box arrives, you can preview it and decide to keep it, or swap it out for another box, or skip the month entirely at no charge. To get 20% off your first box, click the link in the description below and then enter the promotional code DeMuro20, or go to bespokepost.com/DeMuro20. Okay, so let's talk Fiat Panda. This car first came out back in 1980, and it was sold throughout the 80s and 90s all the way through 2003. Fiat's goal with this car was simple: to create an Italian people's car that would appeal to everybody, was cheap and practical, and they did it. And this car came to define motoring in 1980s and 90s Italy. And I'm not exaggerating. Fiat made almost 4.5 million of these over this car's 2-decade production run. And if you lived in Italy in this area, you either had a Panda or you knew someone who did. Even today, it is impossible to walk around any Italian city and not encounter at least a few Pandas parked into tiny spaces, still being kept on the road because of mechanical simplicity and easy parts availability. The Panda was never sold here in North America, but today I'm going to review this imported model, and I'll show you everything. First, I'll take you on a thorough tour of the Panda and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Panda with a quick discussion of this car's purpose. It was intended to be a people's car, something that was practical, simple, and affordable. That was the goal, something that fit with the lifestyle of a huge number of Italians in this period. And unlike Americans, Italians don't live in their cars, spend all their day in the car. They don't need something with tons of luxury and a lot of power. They just need something basic and city-friendly, and that's what this car was. In fact, it was only 135 inches long, which is almost 2 feet shorter than a modern Mini Cooper, which is an incredibly small car. And these only weighed about 1,700 pounds, which is like half the weight of a traditional modern car. But that worked for Panda buyers. They wanted something simple and cheap, and this was that. And as you look around the Panda, you can find some great examples of this car's simple and cheap ethos everywhere. For instance, the door handle. There is no door handle. Instead, you have a button and then a little slot where you put your hand in to open the door. That's because it was cheaper for Fiat to make it this way than to stamp out a panel in the door where you'd have a door handle and then stick that part on there. That was deemed unnecessarily expensive, so you got a button and a slot. Now, you may think, well, that's all you really need, but the drawback here is, unlike a regular door handle where you walk up to the car and you just lift it in one motion, with this you had to push with one finger and then pull in the slot with the other finger, which you couldn't really do if you had something in your hands. It was simple and cheap, but less comfortable. And that is a theme carried throughout this entire car. Another instance of cheap and simple, but less comfortable, comes when you open up the door. You can see the door panel, the top part, there is a padded surface, but the bottom is just bare metal painted the body color of the car. No, like, luxurious leather door panel here, not even cloth, you just got metal. Cheaper, simpler, but less comfortable. In fact, the goal of this interior was to take it down to the very basics, maximize practicality, and not really care about anything else. And there's a great story that when this car was first shown to the Fiat marketing department in the late 1970s, they said, "The interior isn't finished. When will you show us the finished interior?" And they had to be told, this was the finished interior. It's just very, very basic. But anyway, before I climb inside, a couple things worth noting on the door panel. One, I love the handle you pull to climb out. This little plastic piece with an arrow, you lift it up and that opens the door. Again, very simple, very basic. And that's also true of the mirror controls. You can see this little handle here adjusts the positioning of the exterior mirror. No fancy power mirrors in this car, of course. You didn't get anything like that. The funny part is the passenger mirror is adjusted the exact same way, but you didn't have to ask your passenger to adjust the mirror for you. This car is so tiny, you could easily just reach across the interior and adjust it yourself to perfectly fit your liking. But anyway, climbing into this interior, I want to show you just how basic and simple this car really is, starting with the climate vents. There are only 2 climate vents on the dashboard intended to blow air at the occupants of this car, and really, it's just this one climate vent, except it can go in 2 separate directions, so driver and passenger can both get a little air blown on them. Now, you will notice there are other climate vents on the sides of the dashboard at the top, but those are only for window defogging. You cannot actually use them to blow air on yourself. And you can see when you try to angle these vents down to blow air lower, they actually just close. They only work on the windshield. And so the only climate vent you have on the dashboard is this tiny little thing right in the center that you can aim in 2 different directions. Now, it's worth noting, of course, this single climate vent really fits in with the purpose of this car. Again, cheaper, simpler, but less comfortable. It gave you everything you needed, but not really anything else. Now, where most cars would normally have climate vents on the dashboard, this car has speakers. You can see one over on the left and another one on the right. I'm not sure if these are factory or aftermarket speakers, but they are the only speakers. The Panda came with a 2-speaker stereo system. You didn't exactly get surround sound in this car. But anyway, next to the speaker, over on the passenger side of the dashboard, you can see the glove box, which is actually just a hole. There's no glove box lid. There's nothing that locks or latches here. This is what you got, just a hole in the dashboard. Again, very basic in here. Probably my favorite interior component in this entire car is the ashtray. You can see right now it's positioned here in the center. One ashtray, which is unusual for Italian cars of this era. Everybody in Italy back then smoked, and you often had one ashtray per seat. But the Panda was so simple, you only had one. Could have caused some problems, except Fiat came up with a brilliant solution. The ashtray slides. Take a look at this. The driver is smoking, wants to put out his cigarette, then the passenger wants the same thing. They can slide the ashtray down the dashboard to make it easier for the passenger to reach. Then the driver needs it again. Hey, can you pass the ashtray? And you can pass it right back over. This sliding ashtray, kind of an ingenious feature to make up for the fact that this car doesn't have 2 front ashtrays. But probably the most striking thing in this interior, especially compared to modern cars, is just how simple the controls in here are. To the left of the steering wheel, two stalks. One is your turn signals, one is your high beams. That's it. And on the right, you have your windshield wiper stalk. No intermittent, no different settings, no auto, just on, off, or the washer. In the center, again, very simple controls. These sliders are your climate controls. You don't have air conditioning in this car, even though there's a red and a blue for temperature. The red is heat. The blue is just air that hasn't been heated, but blue is a bit of a misconception. It may be cold, but it may not, depending on what's outside the car. You also have other simple controls in here. So you can see your headlights is this switch here. You push them up to turn them on, and then other basic controls, rear washer, hazard lights, fog lights, and there's also a clock. All very simple. And it's the same deal with the gauge cluster, although I must say I absolutely love this image on the gauge cluster, this top-down view of the car with all these little warning areas. When a warning light would turn on, it would illuminate roughly corresponding to the spot on the car where it actually existed. So you can see the high beams light is near the headlights, the battery is under the hood. Even the low fuel warning light is on the correct side of the car that the fuel tank is on, which is kind of a cool little trick. All these correctly placed warning lights in this very simple gauge cluster. In fact, everything is so simple and basic and cheap in here that you have a rear view mirror, of course, and you also have sun visors, of course, and they might hit each other when you're using them. You put down the sun visor, depending on the position of the mirror, they may intersect. Modern cars, that would never happen. They make the tolerances perfect so they don't collide. But in this thing, hey, you had a mirror and a visor, you should be happy about that. Now, with all that said, one interesting display this car had, beyond the usual basic stuff, is this one. Mounted on the top of the dashboard, shows your pitch and roll while you're driving along in real time. Seems kind of odd. Why would a little city-friendly economy car need a display like that? Well, you see, that's because this isn't just any Fiat Panda. This is a Panda 4x4. And you can see stamped into the rear panel back here, Panda, and then 4x4. And you thought the Subaru Impreza was the first compact car with all-wheel drive. No. Fiat had it back in the early 80s. And frankly, it was a brilliant idea. Italians wanted small, cheap little cars, but a lot of Italy is hilly and with poor condition roads, so a four-wheel drive makes sense. Combining those two things makes the most sense, and therefore you have the 4x4. Now, a lot of these were sold with front-wheel drive, but you could get four-wheel drive if you wanted. To turn it on, you have this little lever right here in the front between the seats. You would pull it up, and that would engage four-wheel drive, and then you were four-wheeling in your compact little city hatchback. Now, back to this car's cheap basicness for a second. I want to talk about something rather interesting back here, and that would be the stamping of Panda and 4x4 into the tailgate. I'm surprised they decided to spend the money to do that, to stamp it in here, but I suspect it was cheaper than badging. And I say that because there isn't a single badge on this entire car, a plastic or metal emblem that says Fiat or Panda. It doesn't have any. The only other badge on this car is the Fiat logo, and it's integrated into the front grille, not a separate badge. It's just part of the grille, which undoubtedly helped them save money as well. No traditional badging anywhere, and instead they just stamped it into the tailgate and painted over it. That was all they had to do. But there is one badge on the side of this car, and that would be actually a decal that says Country Club. You might be wondering, what is that about? Well, like I said, this car came out in the early 80s, and this is a 95 model. By the time it had been out for more than 10 years, it was starting to feel a little old, outdated. So Fiat started to come out with special editions that were really strangely named. You had, for instance, the Panda Young. What did that mean? Nobody really knows. There was also the Panda Shopping and the Panda Dance. None of those made any sense, but probably the least sensical Panda special edition was this one, the Country Club, because there is nothing Country Club about this incredibly tiny, cheap little car. The only real differences that any of these special edition models had were usually a decal on the side that said what they were, plus maybe a paint color and different interior fabric. Like in this car, this is apparently the Country Club fabric, and that was a really cheap way that Fiat kind of kept these interesting year after year new special editions like the Panda Dance. But anyway, speaking of the interior fabric, let's go back to the interior for a second. I'm gonna pop open the tailgate back here, and you can see the cargo area. Not huge, but surprisingly large considering you get 2 rows of seats and a cargo area in a vehicle that's only 135 inches long. Now, you can also see in this cargo area, very basic back here, rubber floor, not padded with carpeting or anything like that. And you even have the seatbelt retractors just sort of exposed in the cargo area. No attempt to hide them or make them look particularly nice. It's basic and simple. That's the whole point. Now, one interesting thing about this cargo area, you can fold down the rear seat, as you can see, and it creates a surprisingly large cargo area back here. Again, maximizing practicality was a big part of this car, and so they wanted to make the cargo area as large as possible. Interestingly, there was even a van version of the Panda that was sold, which didn't have rear windows and had sort of a squared off back for even more cargo capacity. But frankly, even in stock passenger form like this car, there was a lot of space back here if you put down the rear seat for people who wanted to get every inch out of the interior. But even though there's clearly a big focus on cargo space in this car, interior room in general was very important to the designers of the Panda, and that included rear seat room, which I shall now demonstrate by climbing in back. First, to get back here, incredibly easy. This little latch on the side of the front seat, you just lift it, the seat goes forward, and it creates a path. Modern cars should be so simple to move a seat out of the way to get into the back. But anyway, I will now climb in. The seat is gone, and I just get inside. Now, I want to stress, it's not huge back here, but I can put the seat back, and I actually have space in this interior for my knees, for my legs. Not a lot of space, but more space than I get in some cars that are a lot bigger than this one. Again, it was all about maximizing practicality in this interior. Now, with that said, the rear seat of this car is absolutely no frills. Nothing luxurious or nice back here. You only get 3 real benefits. One, the windows and the sides of the rear seats, they pop out, but only this far. That's all the fresh air you get if you're sitting in the back of one of these. Also, you have your Country Club fabric, once again, to remind you that this is a special edition Panda. And finally, you get an ashtray. Because of course you get an ashtray in a car from this era from Italy. Absolutely no frills in this back seat, but an ashtray is required equipment. And next up, we move under the hood, and you can see the engine, which is, of course, incredibly small. Tiny car, made for the city, tiny engine. And you can also see under here, there's a tire and a wheel. This is, of course, the spare, and they didn't want to put it in the back in the cargo area because they didn't want to steal interior room. They really wanted to maximize passenger and cargo space, so the spare tire is under the hood, sharing space with the engine. Now, that was pretty easy to do because the engine is so tiny. Although this particular Panda has the largest engine these were ever offered with, a 1.1 liter 4-cylinder. It makes about 55 horsepower. That seems real small, but when these first came out, they were offered with a 650cc 2-cylinder that made about 30 horsepower. So this is essentially a muscle car by comparison. By the way, one other interesting function of having the spare under the hood, you also have the tire iron here, and it's hooked on to the windshield washer fluid reservoir with this little clip that's designed for it. You don't see too many washer fluid reservoirs that have a space to mount a tire iron. And finally, I want to talk about this car's design. On the outside, it may look simple or even boring, but actually, this look was pretty radical for the time period. It is almost aggressively boxy. not intended to be stylish, but rather practical and to maximize interior space. This became a hallmark of Fiat designs in the 1980s and 90s. Very boxy cars kind of became what they were known for, and it started right here. Now, this car was famously designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro of Ital Design. He also created icons like the Lotus Esprit, the original Maserati Ghibli, the original Volkswagen Golf, which had a similar shape. But this is probably the car he is best known for, since so many of them were built and because the design was relatively radical at the time. Now, also, in terms of the design, it's worth noting that, like I mentioned, this car was fairly radical when it was first revealed to the public in March of 1980 at the Geneva Motor Show, but over the years, the design started to get outdated. I mentioned this car was sold through 2003, and by then it really seemed old. In fact, in the mid-90s, most Italian car shoppers were going with other vehicles that were more modern, but the Panda soldiered on as sort of a basic, simple, cheap alternative for those who wanted that. And like I said, 4.5 million of these built over a 23-year production run. This car really was an icon in Italy at the time. And so those are the quirks and features of the original Fiat Panda. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Panda, an icon of 80s and 90s Italian motoring. All right, first thing you realize when you're driving this car, I love modern cars and I love the safety features in modern cars and how incredible all the technology is to help you prevent an accident, but it's difficult to truly replace windows. This car is just, the visibility is just amazing. You feel like you can see everything. I know where everything is at any given moment. And of course, the windows are right at the edges of the car, especially in back, so I can see exactly how far behind something is. It feels dangerous in a sense because you know everything's only like an inch wide in terms of crash protection, but also it just, you feel like you're almost part of the car. Like it's this big. This is what it is. Modern cars lack that. They just feel so much more insulated. Now, the first thing you really notice when you start accelerating is, of course, there's not much power. 55 horsepower. This car weighs 1,700 pounds, but even then, 55 horsepower is a small number. All right, I'm gonna floor it here. Let's see. A lot of noise. Oh, I'm flooring it, going. Oh, that's 60, which I guess is 30. This thing, it does not have a lot of speed to it. That's not its forte. But again, that wasn't really the point. The point was to mobilize, Italian people in cities in this era. Now, I gotta say, I really love Italy. I love visiting Italy. It's one of my favorite places. And seeing these is still, every time you go anywhere in Italy, you'll see 20 of these. They are still parked in every Italian city with one tire up on the curb, little cars. And if you go into some mountainous areas, you will still see these four-wheel drive versions being used for that purpose. In the lakes in northern Italy, these are still relatively common vehicles. They were simple. When they break, they're easy to fix, and they had pretty decent capability. The four-wheel drives were also raised ground clearance a little bit compared to the regular version. From a driving perspective, this car ain't much. And I think everybody kind of knew that. Like, that's not really the point of it. Dynamically, it's nothing. Acceleration is nothing. It's not fun to throw around, But it's cool to be in this little car and have this sort of back to basics experience. Modern vehicles don't really offer this anymore. The cheapest, most basic cars you can get these days, stuff like the Honda Civic, they're not that basic. They got a lot of stuff to them. And it's kind of interesting to see what would a car have been if they just engineered out everything except the stuff you absolutely need, and that's what this car is. Truthfully, seeing these around Italy, whenever I go there, I have always wanted to know what it was like. I've always wanted to experience this car and check it out, and it's really kind of interesting to do. It's similar to how I expected, although a little bit less eager to accelerate and rev. These really are low on power. But they're fun, they're cool and interesting and little, and it's just kind of a neat experience to be able to drive this car that was such an icon in that place for so many years. Ultimately, this car is intended to be cheap, practical, basic. That's exactly what it is. It feels cheap, practical, and basic. It's not fast, it's not particularly enthralling, but it mobilized people for not that much money. And in early 80s, mid 80s, 90s Italy, that's what they needed. That's what the population needed. And this car delivered it. And It's amazing to drive one in the States, where there probably only maybe a dozen or 24 have been imported over the years. And so that's the Fiat Panda. This car isn't luxurious or fast, but it is special, and it's an absolute icon of Italian cars and driving from this era. I love Italy, and in every trip I've ever taken to Italy, I've seen these on the road, and I've always wondered what they were like. And now I know, and now you know, and now it's time to give the Panda a Doug score.
And the Doug score is here, 37 out of 100, which places the Panda here against other sort of similar cars I've reviewed. This car is a riot, incredibly small and underpowered and ill-equipped, but also an icon in Italy and a cool and special car, particularly for the money. I've always thought the Panda was cool. Every time I've gone to Italy, I've always wanted to see what it's all about. And now I know, not really all that much, but at least it's charming and cute.